Good afternoon. Today I'm talking about widgets it's and the whole idea is to talk about widgets and for KWDC. That introduction sounded boring, right? So hi everyone. My Anyan Haseo Yerabun. My name is Rudrank Riyam, and today I will talk a lot about widgets and app intents. A brief introduction about me. I'm coming all the way from India for the talk and KWDC and everything beautiful about Seoul and hopefully Busan in the next coming days. And I've been doing iOS for maybe 6 to 7 years now. I started out in college and I did a lot of internships to gain industry experience, including interning with the Apple team, with the macOS CD team. I have been freelancing as a developer and a technical writer for Apple platforms for the past 5 years. And currently, I'm working on my books, articles, and my blog. And there is this new editor called as Cursor AI, which helps you with AI assistant coding. And if you find something, anything related to Cursor AI and iOS development, you are most likely to find me. And with that, I have a lot to cover, so I will pali pali. I have loved widgets since on my iPhone all these years. Yet, I would find myself thinking, would it not be cool if I could interact with them? And wow, Apple read my mind last year. With the announcement in 2023, the introduction of the interactive widgets made our home screens more informative and interactive. I was thrilled and directly dived into the WWDC sessions to understand more about them. And after some exploration, I was sure that I would give a talk about it. From iOS to iPadOS lock screen to everywhere on macOS desktop and watchOS smart stacks and live activities too, they are now omnipresent, like widgets everywhere and not a pixel to spare. You wake up to your sound of your alarm, and your phone is right there beside you with the standby mode. One widget shows the time, and the other shows the temperature for the day ahead. You pick up your phone, and you're greeted with lock screen widgets there. There is a widget that shows the time zone of your friends, while the other is about reminders and another about the emails for the day. A quick facial recognition, and you unlock the device. The world of widget expands. The home screen is alive with widgets of various sizes, small, medium, or large. Each offers a quick peek into your digital life. And as you continue using your phone to listen to music or order something, you have dynamic islands of information. As your morning progresses, perhaps you take a walk in the park, maybe the children's grand park, and then you check out your watch, and there's a widget stack that shows your fitness numbers. Returning home, breakfast awaits, you open your iPad, and wow, small size widgets even on the lock screen now. You start your work, and there it is, an extra large widget dominating the screen, which is packed with details, stats, and visuals, a world of information in just one glance. Then you finish the notes on the iPad and head towards your Mac. And right there, widgets of all shapes and sizes on the desktop to greet you. So many widgets. As I said before, widgets everywhere, not a pixel to spare. But was it like this from the beginning? No. It took us a long journey of 4 years from 2020 to reach where we are today and 5 iOS versions. I want to touch a brief on the history of widgets from iOS 14, the transition from the dull static widgets to the interactive animated widgets that we have, so that you appreciate more as I talk about the implementation later. In iOS 14, Apple introduced the widgets and they marketed it as information that is displayed on your home screen in one glance without you having to open your app. The widgets give you information like the weather or the reminders, and developers were given the power to explore and experiment with the new widget kit. But there was no interaction involved, and they became a way to just to have the core information of your app without opening it. In iOS 15, Apple was setting the stage where we got no features in terms of the widgets, but Apple introduced a few new system widgets like Find My, Game Center, App Store Today, Sleep, Mail, and more. In iOS 16, there were new possibilities. The widgets from the home screen came into the lock screen, which had very specific information about your app due to the constrained space, like the first event in your calendar, or the latest reminder for the day, the current temperature, the fitness ring, or even the battery indicator of your AirPods. It also allowed the developers to have the main core information about the app available right just from the lock screen. We also got dynamic live activities that would update much more frequently and were available from the lock screen. And those who had the latest iPhone with the dynamic island could access this information from the island as well. Then we entered my favorite era, which I call the interactive era in iOS 17, where widgets would interact directly. You could interact with the widget directly from the home or the lock screen. For example, if you want to checkmark a reminder, you can do it from the widget itself. Or if you have to play or pause music, just a simple tap. No need to go to the app even for the main functionalities. And now, we finally have widgets everywhere in iOS 18, including the control center and the lock screen where you can replace your beloved torch and the camera icons as well. You can add controls to the control center where you toggle them for easy access, and then this is how you would do it to remove the torch and the camera. So now that we know how the widgets evolve over the years, let's do a brief recap. We have a view that conforms to the widget protocol. This is, if you have written Swift UI, you know it is similar to how you have your view conforming to the view protocol. And in this, we have a body which is similar to having a sum view in Swift UI. Here we have some widget configuration instead. This widget configuration are mainly of three types. One is the static configuration for displaying static data. Then we have a dynamic configuration when you can make changes to the widget itself. And the third one, or the most relevant one that we will more talk about, is the app intent configuration. Then we pass a provider to this configuration that has all the entries that will be displayed in the widget. And then finally, we pass a view that we call an entry to display our widgets. And based on which platform you're supporting, the supported families range from small, medium, large, accessory rectangular, and there are many more. And then you have different types of configurations, as I mentioned. And just one second. So the changes in widgets are different from Swift UI. So you cannot have a state variable that is changing the state of the view. The idea is that the changes are driven in a timeline and not the state. This is very important to know because when you're working with widget kit, because I have been burned many times, or like I had a lot of issues working with widgets because I did not understand this fundamental concept. If there's a new change, there is a new timeline that is generated, and then in that timeline, you add multiple entries. You can either add it at the end of the entries that you have or at a specific time. As I mentioned, I want to mention it again, the widget is not changed based on the state. So Please keep that in mind. So we have, so for working with widgets, or let's say we are all exposed to the world of AI, and for AI, for Apple, it usually means Apple Intelligence. But when it comes to developers, I think AI means App Intents. So Apple has this very exciting framework called as the App Intents. This has been used before for providing shortcuts or Siri if you have worked with it, so you already are familiar with this framework. The idea is that you have a protocol, and this protocol takes the title, and it has a perform method that you work on that performs some action. And it can also be an asynchronous action that you can call a network call in the intent. So to have a better understanding in general terms, if you are doing an action on the system, it is an intent. If I say, hey Siri, at what time is KWDC happening? So that is an intent or the action that I'm providing to Siri. So you need an intent when you have an action that you want to drive in your app. This mindset is important when you are developing the app intents for your app and your core functionalities that will go into the interactive widgets. To give an example, here I have a pet intent action, which is for a cute little pet widget, and it conforms to the app intent protocol. I give it a title like a cute pet, and the initializer takes, for the action, I have a pet AI manager that does some, on the object of the pet, it would pet the pet. So with that in mind, this is an intent that you're doing to pet the pet, and then you use that intent in a view, like you have a button which you tap to pet the pet, and if the pet gets excited, then you have a string for that to make it a happy pet. So that is a simple example, and there are two extensions working with app intent. Another thing I think I should have mentioned is that all the widgets are written in SwiftUI. So if you're a fan of Objective-C or UIKit, you will have to learn how SwiftUI works. And in SwiftUI, you have this button structure, which has a lot of initializers. Apple added two specific ones, which is only for working with app intent. This takes an intent as the intent that conforms the app intent protocol and a label. Let's say we have a button for playing some music, and then I have a default value that change based on the interaction that we have, and we have a play button and a play image. And then we extend the button and then add the button intent to it. And the PlayStation intent, in that we are performing an action, it takes a parameter of the title or the station object itself, and then we perform the method which is calling playing the station itself. To show an example, here I have a video that should hopefully play. So as you saw, as a user, I do not know when the action will actually happen. Like if I go and repeat the video again, I just don't know if there was a network call made or not. So in these cases, you have a provider or a modifier called as invalidatable content that gives a reaction that, okay, this content will be invalidated or can be changed. So it will kind of blink it will start blinking as soon as you click on the play button. So as a user, you have an idea that, okay, some progress is being made. Then we have another extension for app intents, which is the toggle extension. And to give you an example, we have a station. It's similar to the playing station, but instead I'm using if I should use the system music player or if I should use a player that is built in my app. And I want the user to have that functionality that they can opt out or opt in to use the system player. So in this, I have a toggle with a value is on. Remember, again, the should use system player value is an app storage or a user default value, or it can be from the database that is changed. It is not a state variable which is defining or running the view. So in this, we are observing the value of should use system player, and when the system player intent actually uses the player, then we see that when I click on it, then it will start using the system player instead. Apart from the interactivity in widgets, the second big feature is using custom animations in your widget. For example, here's how the default animation looks for a play button when it invalidates the change. The best part is that if you have worked with Swift UI apps before, you do not have to learn implementing animations again. But I'm not sure if you can do all the magic that Pavel did in his talk about Swift UI animations, but you can have basic custom animations. For example, I want to have a content animation that kind of crossfades, which looks nice compared to the default animation. So you can experiment and play with the animations so that your widgets stand out from the rest of the widgets that are on your user's home screen. After understanding and going through a few examples of working with interactive widgets, let's move on how we can implement them across different Apple platforms. Starting with iOS. We have already seen how we can have a small or medium interactive widgets, perform an action on it, and update the data and timeline entries. The same logic applies on the widgets of a lock screen as well. But this time, I want to focus on the iOS 18 controls that we have. So in iOS 18, we have control widgets, and these control widgets conform to the control widget protocol, which is very similar to the widget protocol, but because it's for the control center, so you have the control protocol. And the provider is an app intent control protocol, because we only have to provide one current value, which displays when you are when you're like adding a control to the center, and the preview value, I confuse. It's preview value that is when it is previewed, and the current value that displays the current value. And you can select, so I will show the example. So when you select a music station, you have an intent of the number of things that you want, and you have provide the parameter summary for it. And then we have the play music station intent, which actually does the action or the intent of finding the music ID and doing the network call to get that particular station. So this is how my control center looks like. I have all the Apple Music stations on my controls just from the home screen. So if I'm going for a run, all I have to do is just click on the energy station, and then it will start playing the station directly from the control widget. So this is a good example on how I can have a simple yet a useful widget that directly shows the app's core functionality from the lock screen. And this is an app that I worked on last month. It was for a mental health startup, and these widgets were, how do I say it so these widgets were featured by Apple on the App Store for one of the best control center widgets. So it's not related to the talk, but I'm very proud of it. Then we have the lock screen interactivity. Everything is very similar to how we have it in the widgets, the normal widgets, but the biggest difference that we have is the space itself. Like if I have to play a station, I can only provide the image and the label to it. But the best part is that even in this constrained space that we have, I can have the interactivity and play music directly from the lock screen. And now we can even remove the default widgets that we had, the torch and the camera, with our own custom implementation. Then we have the standby mode available on the iPhone. When your iPhone is on charge and in a landscape position, you can have two small widgets on a dark background. These widgets scale to fit the one half of the screen, and to make it look native according to the other system widgets, you have to make some few changes. So you have to remove, or it is suggested that you remove the background in those standby widgets until it is very necessary. For example, if you have in a widget for a map, you cannot remove the map itself. So in that case, you will keep the background, but let's say you have some image that do not add to the main functionality of the app, then you can think of removing it. And secondly, you make the UI bigger so that it stands out because it's on a landscape position on your desk. So it's much easier to read when the font is larger. In iOS 17, we have the environment value, which is shows widget container background. And as the name suggests, it tells the system that it will show the container background or not. If it does, well and good, then you can use the widgets that you have. Otherwise, then you can update the layout for the new standby mode. I usually prefer to have different views for each of them instead of trying to add if else everywhere in the view, just for the sake of readiness and clarity. In my case, I made the text and the play button more prominent on the widget while keeping the artwork for aesthetics. But when the ambient of the surrounding goes below a certain threshold, let's say at night, the widgets desaturates with a red tint. And for the standby mode, it is important that you adapt to this type as well so that you can provide the best standby experience to your users. And what I will talk about next also applies to the new tinting that we have on the widgets or the new dark mode. So you can use the same widget rendering affect environment value for knowing if it is a vibrant type or if it is desaturated. So the cases that we have is vibrant or decolorized and desaturated. If it is not equal to vibrant, or which is the normal one, then you can provide the value that you want. Otherwise, you can just use a linear gradient or something that you feel is much more adaptive to a standby mode. For example, I don't think it makes sense to have an artwork when the user is sleeping and show them the artwork, so I just have a button and the name of the station itself. Coming to the larger screen of the iPad, we still have small, medium, and large widgets. But we also have the extra large widgets that were introduced past year, which you can also use to provide interactivity. From a designer perspective, you have to ensure that you do not overwhelm the user with choices. In my first design implementation, I added 8 songs on the extra large widgets, but I realized from the feedback that it was too overwhelming for the user to select which song that they want to play, and it was too much. And in thinking in terms of accessibility, when you increase the font size, then the items just go out of the widget itself, and the design felt very constrained. So I reduced it to 6 songs, giving the widget more space to breathe. We also have the lock screen on the iPad, and while on the iOS, we only have the small ones, which is the inline, circular, and the rectangular. On the iPad, you can also have the normal small widgets when the iPad is in the landscape mode, which is available on the left side of the lock screen. Again, the widgets are decolorized and saturated, similar to how we had in the standby mode. So you have to make sure that you adapt the layout of the small widgets to this one. For example, right now I'm just using it directly that I have in my iOS app, and the decolorized artwork does not look great or does not provide any value to the user. So it makes sense to just remove it, like how I removed it for the night mode in standby, by checking if the rendering mode is equal to vibrant or not. Let's move on to macOS. This platform gives you a huge advantage that you do not have to create widgets for it at all. You can directly have all the widgets from the iPhone and the iPad, and if any changes or interactions are made on the iPhone, it is also updated on the macOS and vice versa. You can have different targets on macOS widgets, and if you have a native and different experience you can provide it for the bigger desktop screen as well. So this is how my widgets look, the extra large widgets look, which utilizes a lot more screen compared to what I had on the iPad itself. So for cases like this, when you have a lot of users who are using the macOS version, the macOS widgets of your app, it makes sense to have a new target for the macOS extensions and then use shared SwiftUI components instead, and then update the layout. So for example, for when you're working with macOS extensions or the widgets, you have a nice little widget simulator as well that you can explore and play around with. And as you can see, I felt that it is much easier to have more breathing space when the widgets are much more bigger on the more bigger display. Lastly, we have the widgets on watchOS, which are normal widgets that do not provide any interaction. You can use it to provide static data for the users. For example, watchOS does not have a music player when you're working with Apple Music. So I wanted to show a now playing song stack with the supported family as an accessory one. I created another target for it, so it's easier to work with it. The code mostly is the same, or like the idea of working with the widgets on watchOS is similar to how you have on iOS as well, so you do not have to learn something new for it. And then you provide the supported family as accessory rectangular, which is what you have on the lock screen as well on iOS. And then you have the view that provides the songs. So in my case, I was using the same shared code that I had for each of the entry rows that I had in the iOS and the macOS, and directly display it on the watchOS stack. The idea is that if I have to play a song on the iPhone or the Mac and I just want to watch which song is playing from my custom app, I can send that data directly to the watch and it updates the timeline, not the state, the timeline, with recreating the new view and then display as on the smart stack itself. And in watchOS 11, we also have interactivity, so you can provide one of the best experience, taking all the things that you learn from working on iOS on watchOS. And what I have learned is that when the watchOS market on the App Store is not as competitive as the iOS store itself. So if you can provide a better watchOS experience, then being featured on the watch OS store is relatively much easier. So with that, I want to conclude on how you work across the widgets across all the platforms. The first step is the interactivity and animations. If you have worked with SwiftUI, then you can continue using the same concepts, almost the same concepts when it comes to the view, but not the concept of working with the timeline. Apple has detailed WWDC sessions back from 2020 that go in depth about it. You use the widget kit to provide the timeline provider and working with the configuration. And then for interactivity, you use the app intents. And the best part of working with app intents is that if you learn the concepts of app intents just for the interactivity, then you can use the same concepts to work on, let's say, the new Apple Intelligence, because it is still driven by the app intents, which I call as the AI for developers. So you can get the shortcuts for free, you can get the Siri accessibility for free, and you can have the app intents for free as well when you're working with interaction. And there's a new trend that is going on, which is intent-driven development, where you keep a lot of your main functionality of your apps in the app intents, so that it's much easier to share them across the widgets as well as Siri as well as shortcuts. And another good thing about is that when you search something on the Spotlight, the chances, if you use the app intents regularly, if the users use them regularly, then the system knows that, okay, this information is important in that app. So if you're searching for a few words in the app, then the chances of your app being shown in the list on spotlights, the likelihood of that happening is much more. So adopting intent-driven development is something that I recommend. And I do not have links to the blog post, but there are many that talk a lot about it. Secondly, there is live activities on iOS, iPad OS, and watchOS. These are a bit different. I wanted to cover more on that, but working with Activity Kit is a session in itself. So Activity Kit is a framework that helps you drive the live activities that you see on your lock screen or in the dynamic island. And if you are working on widgets, it is suggested that you make sure that you provide a native layout experience for each of the platforms that you have. For iOS, it is different. It is different for iPadOS for the last screens. And for macOS, you have to make a bit of changes. When you're working on the lock screen, you have to make sure that you can squeeze a lot of main information in just a circle or a rectangular bar. So these considerations is something that you have to make sure that you keep in mind when you're designing the widgets itself. And with that, I hope I wrap up blabbering a lot about widgets journey. I want to thank you all for listening. And I want you to take everything that you have learned today and go all with your creativity. You can start with a very small functionality of your app and just add interactive widgets. And the best part is that because interactive widgets were announced last year, and if you use a lot of AI assistant coding, a lot of the LLMs out there are already trained on the latest interactive widgets. So if you just write, let's say if you use, I won't promote a service, so I will just say, let's you use your favorite LLM, and you just say that I have this code, so please write me interactive widgets for it, and then you get the code, which is the timeline, your timeline provider, your intent, your view, and the widget bundle itself. And from there, you can go on. So the idea is add interactivity using intents, even if it is a simple one. Get your hands dirty. Widgets are one of the hardest framework I have worked in the past 7 years. Like when I gave this talk, when I chose this topic, I was doubting myself again and again, because every time when I'm working with widgets, I know it's difficult to debug them. It's very difficult to debug them. And I hope the Apple improves the tooling, but what we have, you have to make sure to keep that in mind. It's not as easier compared to iOS development, but you can create some good widgets. So if you create something cool using widgets or interactive widgets, please tag me on my socials, and they are so amazing. The world of widgets awaits you, so just make some widgetry happen. And with that, Gamsanida.